And let me say that this is going to be an absolute pleasure. Navrina, welcome.
Thank you so much, Renee.
So I'm going to jump right into it. So you're the CEO of Credo AI. You're also the founder of Credo AI. If you were to describe yourself within the context of artificial intelligence, how would you define yourself?
Oh, absolutely. So we provide oversight and accountability of AI systems. And what that means is, as you can imagine, with artificial intelligence, there's not only new kinds of risks, but there's also existing risks. So Credo AI helps you figure out where those risks are and helps you mitigate those at scale.
So we have heard so much about risk, and we know with AI there's extraordinary rewards, extraordinary promise, but there are risks and there are pitfalls. If you were to outline some of those risks and the kinds of response that you have deployed against those risks, what would you say those risks are, and what would you say we need to do to ensure we detect, mitigate, and of course manage those risks?
Absolutely. But before I answer that, just show of hands, how many of you know AI? Heard of AI? That's good. How many of you have heard of responsible AI? Wow, that's amazing. How many of you are excited about generative AI? Okay. How many of you have played around with ChatGPT? Oh, wow, quite a few. Okay, so the reason I asked that is, it's interesting. Past three and a half years, I've spent time talking to audience like this, and responsible AI is still an emerging field, very young, and there's a lot of action happening at a global scale. We have over 1,000 principles launched across the globe by different nations and countries around how do you define, how do you use, how do you procure artificial intelligence in a responsible AI manner. And just in the past, I would say 2 weeks, everything we knew about responsible AI is getting disrupted at scale because of generative AI. So the reason I wanted to get a sense of who knows what is, I'll take generative AI as an example. Autopilot, it's an interesting tool that can be used by coders to basically write code. So if you're an engineer like myself, oh my God, how fun is that? You can go from 0 to 1 like that. 1 to 100 is a very different question. So with Autopilot, you're seeing issues like copyright laws. So as you can imagine, Autopilot has been trained on corpus of data which comes from GitHub, where different developers have contributed code. So as you can imagine, if I'm a company using Autopilot, now suddenly I have to start paying attention to the IP risk and copyright risks that I'm exposing my organizations to. Second example, we work a lot with financial services organizations. As you can imagine, in financial services, right now, first and foremost, they're not using generative AI because, as you can imagine, for high-impact, high-value use cases like fraud, anti-money laundering, risk scoring, traditional AI systems have been used, like gradient boosting, linear regression, et cetera. And even in those traditional systems, there's a lot of concerns around, for example, fairness. So if you are using a risk scoring system, which is based on machine learning, you're looking at credit card transactions. And based on that credit card transaction, you might be looking at some proxy variables which might have protected attributes. So in that case, is there a way or is there a chance that your AI system potentially could be providing different outcomes based on maybe your gender? A couple of years ago, we had the Apple Card example, which I'm sure many of you read about, but it wasn't providing the right level of credit for women because women generally don't manage finances within a household, and as a result of which, women didn't get the credit scores that men were getting. So are there issues pervasive within fairness, within security, within sustainability, within privacy in these AI systems? So at Credo, we are tracking right now 9, but as you can imagine, with generative AI, those risks are just increasing day in, day out.
Oh, thank you. And one of the big questions, I think for me as someone who's an AI ethicist and someone who teaches data and AI and tech ethics, is this definition. How would you define responsible AI?
Yeah, great question. And this is something we've spent really 3 years thinking about. Who do we want to be in this ecosystem? Because again, there are terms like responsible, trustworthy, ethical AI. And it was a very mindful choice. We decided not to use the word ethics. And the reason is it's very difficult and a complex topic to define what the ethical values of each and every individual, let alone organization, is. So we at Credo focus extensively on responsible use, responsible procurement, responsible development of artificial intelligence. And the reason for that is, in that case, we are trying to keep accountability central to the work that we are doing. So who is going to be accountable, who's going to be responsible for the outcomes of these systems, for the procurement of these systems, for the designs of these systems. So for us, that's a core focus at Credo.
Interesting that you introduced the word accountability, because we speak so much of systems being accountable and transparent and explainable and fair and auditable, all creating major challenges in the AI space. But there's something we seem not to be getting right, because no matter how many frameworks there are, no matter how many policies and ethicists doing this work, things are not happening in the way that we hope they should happen when it comes to reducing risk, when it comes to dealing with discrimination, when it comes to dealing with those historic data sets that continue to present some very unique challenges for the world of AI and, of course, data science. Yeah. So in your interpretation, what are we not getting right, or what do we need to do better when it comes to accountability, transparency, to be responsible and to be trustworthy within the space of AI?
Renee, you're very kind. You said we are not getting some things right. I think we're getting a lot of things wrong right now. And so let me give you examples. First and foremost, as I mentioned, globally, there are over 1,000 frameworks. There's emerging regulations in Europe leading the charge with EU AI Act. There's a lot of work happening in the United States. I'm a member of the National AI Advisory Council, which has been tasked to advise President Biden with upcoming regulations and policies. And so there's extensive amount of work happening within the United States at state, federal level as well. So the things, I think, as you can imagine, with one, the increase in regulatory focus, with the consumer pressures that we are getting, and if you recall just last week, or the week before last, I'm losing track in generative AI timeline, but Google, in one day lost $100 billion in market cap because of one demo mistake with their Bard chatbot. So as you can imagine, when you have these consumer pressure, when you have these regulatory pressure, the question really begs, what does good look like? And to answer your question, what are we not getting right now, is we don't know what good looks like. And the reason we don't know what good looks like is because it's super contextual. The same AI application, and I think I've overused this example, so pardon me for those who've heard me speak previously, but a facial recognition app on your phone which unlocks your phone versus the same facial recognition that is giving you access to a building with proprietary information, with the same facial recognition being used in surveillance. As you can imagine, all these three use cases have very, very different risk profile. One is low risk, and the other, surveillance, is super high risk. So when you think about the spectrum of risk, how do you put the guardrails? What do you measure? What do you measure at the data set, model, and system level versus what kind of policies do you have at the organizational level? So all that drastically changes. And so we at Credo are really focused on operationalizing not just the organizational governance, but testing of these systems so that we can marry the two to bring accountability.
And just within the realm of governance and international governance and global policy, we've seen that the EU AI Act has pretty much been very specific when it comes to what's risk. Saying things like facial recognition technology, definitely something that's too high risk, or deploying algorithms in human resource management or talent acquisition, or in anything that deals with a particular kind of training, healthcare, transportation, all very risky. But somehow in the US, we've seemed not quite able to really become very specific about our risk, or as you said, what does good look like, or what does responsible look like? Yeah. There's always these questions, and I hear it a lot from my student, who's leading when it comes to governance and policy and compliance and oversight? So we have the US, we have the EU. What's the state of play there, and what could we learn from each other?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I do want to give credit in United States. I think we are not the regulators of the world. We are, we want to enable innovation. We have great policies, but those policies are at different levels. As I mentioned, federal level, we've seen, I was just talking to Nick, who is here, and great work to OSTP for coming up with Bill of Rights, but as you know, that's not enforceable. That's, general principles and guidelines. But then you look at what New York State is doing, New York City is doing. They've come up with specific regulations, for example, for hiring algorithms. If you are an enterprise in New York City buying third-party HR vendor tools, there is a requirement through this local law number 144 to be able to provide bias audits by April 16th of this year. Obviously, there's been a lot of discussion and debate and good lobbying and bad lobbying around what AADT really means, which is the automatic employment decision-making tools. And I think there's a lot of healthy discussions, but it's getting us to a point of what does that context look like and how do we come up with regulation. Having said that, just with a show of hands before we rattle off a lot of different things, how many of you have heard of Europe's Artificial Intelligence Act? Oh, awesome. I love this audience. This is great. So I think in context of, if you think about just the history of Europe, it's, they have been great at regulating with GDPR and other things. With EU AI Act, we are seeing a similar trend, especially for general purpose artificial intelligence systems, where they're looking at risk profiling. Is that United States approach? No. However, as we are looking at policies and state and local regulation, we are coming to a realization that context and, in some cases, risk-based profiles might be useful. Another example is insurance. Colorado's SB 169, it's being extensively debated right now with the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. And the whole idea behind SB 169 is really pushing for transparency and impact assessments of AI systems, especially when they are used for personal insurance, life insurance, property insurance, et cetera. So I think to answer your question, I think there's good work happening among our allies in United States, and there's actually some great work happening in Global South. There's great work happening. We've been working with Singapore government for a couple of years now on their model governance framework. Same thing with Canada's impact assessment. We are seeing this emergence of the need for ensuring AI is in service of humanity. And I think that is the objective. If we all can keep central to our conversations, a lot of good can happen.
And definitely, and within that context of AI for humanity, you've introduced the impact assessments, which are critical, and of course the ability to audit these algorithms, because algorithms, have a way in which they could misbehave, and we have seen that, particularly communities of color, our indigenous communities, women. We've seen ableism. We've seen all sorts of challenges when it comes to the ways in which we need to do this for humanity. Now we know last year the White House released the blueprint for the AI Bill of Rights, and just everyone was excited about that. But then when we drill deep into it, we realized, something more or something is missing. And for a lot of ethicists, that missing part has been enforcement, as well as how do companies really adopt this? How do you create your own frameworks around it? So within that realm of enforcement, when will we get to that place where there's a certain comfort level that not only is there the oversight and the compliance and we're working on the regulations, but we can actually see some real-time enforcement?
Renée, that's such a fantastic question, because one of the things that I'm seeing in our work at Credo, and I do want to talk a little bit about it so that all of you get context. We are not a consulting organization. We actually provide you software tool, AI governance tools that sit on top of your machine learning infrastructure, and we are able to bring in context, whether that context is coming from your company policies, whether it is coming from your regulations or standards like NIST AI RMF, and we codify that to be able to test your technical systems, your data sets, your models, but also your processes. And the reason I'm giving that context is one of the big things we are recognizing is the way organizations, whether you're commercial sector or government, they end up using Credo is by creating governance artifacts. And these governance artifacts could be a transparency report, it could be an impact assessment, it could be model cards or AI solution cards. But one of the things that we are still trying to, I would say, do with our customer base is enabling impacted communities to be able to get visibility into these governance artifacts whenever the companies are ready to share and be able to incorporate that feedback. And so I did want to highlight and underscore making sure impacted communities have a pathway for redress, have a pathway for feedback into these technical systems, super critical. Having said that, I think we need to be doing more. And this goes back to your question of around enforcement. By the way, if for those who raise their hands on responsible AI and staying up to date with it, I'm sure you're seeing the work FTC has been doing, the work CFPB has been doing. Commissioner Keith Sonderling, not doctor, he's been very actively talking about AI algorithms and the desperate impact that these systems have on hiring and employment and disability. I think great work is happening right now on the enforcement side as well to ensure that these systems and how the US citizens get impacted is managed from day one. And that's why, again, by the way, I'm an advocate for technology. I'm an engineer by training, spent the past 20 years building AI products and tools at companies like Microsoft and Qualcomm. But I also understand when there's a technology like AI, which has that scale of impact and at the speed of innovation that's happening, how critical it is to start putting in place some guardrails, whether it's regulatory guardrails, whether it's self-assessments, whether it is some other proactive action through enforcement.
Well, as a criminologist, I must touch the concept of justice and fairness. And these are things that we are still struggling with within the realm of AI. So we know that diversity, equity, and inclusion critical to the ways in which we design, develop, deploy our algorithms, and of course, adopt them. But we're also seeing this question about whether or not we can do innovation ethically, whether or not we can do innovation inclusively. What are your thoughts about inclusive innovation?
Super critical. I would say this is where, as an engineer, I've seen a change or a shift. My early years working as an engineer, I was focused on mobile technologies. So we were building these cell site modems. So if you have a cell phone, you're communicating to a base station, and I was the hardware engineer building those base station chips. So very, very technical. In that case, you didn't need that multi-stakeholder perspective. You needed an engineering perspective to make sure that these systems work. However, now when you look at artificial intelligence systems, they are drastically different. And we are seeing that, by the way, at Credo AI in our sales cycle, in our implementation cycle. It is no longer about just a data scientist and a machine learning engineer showing up together, building a system, and putting it out in the world. What ends up happening then is you get racist bots or bots that don't perform, right? So the question now begs is, how do you bring in policy perspective? I have here our director of policy, Avi Fully, right there, who brings in great perspective from DC, from Brussels, to really inform how we as technologists should be thinking about operationalizing all the great work that's happening in this ecosystem. We are working with compliance people, because as you can imagine now, the compliance jobs are getting much harder. You cannot just know the set of rules and regulations and try and be compliant to it, because rules and regulations don't exist. So how do you still ensure that you are, within the guardrails, trying to do your best? And we are seeing a lot of, I would say, interesting perspective from philosophers. We are seeing designers participate in AI. So I would say truly in artificial intelligence, we are seeing this coming together of multi-stakeholder perspectives, because it is not a technical problem anymore. It's a socio-technical problem that we are trying to solve with artificial intelligence, which needs those multiple stakeholders.
And given the fact that it is a socio-technological experience and an experiment that we are seeing, one of the most critical things would be the impact of AI, as you said, on humanity and, of course, on the future of society. One of the other things about AI is that all we think we know about it, we may not know about it. And that's the big challenge. What do you see as the future of AI and the ways in which we need to deploy these trustworthy toolkits and the responsible AI approaches? So what does that future look like? And what does the future of responsible AI look like?
Oh, that's a heavy question. The reason it's a heavy question is because I can see literally two alternative realities we go into. And yes, we are living in a simulation, if you will. The two alternative realities are if we don't take action right now, if we do not think about guardrails, if we sort of bring in the mindset that I know is called the Silicon Valley mindset of move fast and break things. There's a reality that we will hit very hard, very quickly if we don't put guardrails with AI. And by the way, I'm based in Bay Area and Silicon Valley. I'm very proud of it. But one of the things that we are embracing is move fast, but with intention. And the question then begs is, what does move fast with intention looks like? And moving fast with intention really looks like when you bring in governance and it can keep pace with AI development. So one of the things with, and I keep bringing up generative AI because I think it's done a fantastic job in democratizing access to artificial intelligence. The very fact that my mom is on ChatGPT and like using it to say, who's Navrina Singh? And then it says, by the way, she died 2 years ago. And my mom's like, what? No, I just spoke to her yesterday. By the way, this really happened. So if you know, there's this concept of hallucination within these systems. And these systems are not always accurate. But the question now is, if my mom, who's almost turning 80, is using ChatGPT, that really means that you can see the power of this technology. And when you see that power of the technology, these two pathways that we might go on is up to us. And right now is the moment to bring in this governance and oversight into this.
Fantastic. So I think we may have time for a question or two. Fantastic.
I was just going to ask, great presentation. Congrats on your company.
Thank you.
It seems like a lot of what you're talking about is kind of like auditing, reporting, and looking into what algorithms are doing within your systems. Where does the accountability come in?
Yeah, great question. And I'm so sorry, I'm going to explain something before I answer that. So auditing, I'm very careful about the word auditing. We don't do auditing because audit generally happens against a set of standards. So right now, if any company says that they're auditing your AI, that's false. They can't audit your AI. So that's one thing. Yes, they can review it, they can assess it, etc.
Impact assessment.
Perfect example. So now that I've explained that, now let me explain where the accountability happens. So the way most of the companies right now use our system is they will do these assessments based on their company policies, or they will do it if there is an existing law, like for example, New York City 144. Or if there is an emerging standard like NIST AI RMF, you can also start seeing readiness to NIST AI RMF. Once they've done the assessment and reviews, which means you've tested your AI systems, your data sets, your models, and your sort of organizational processes, the accountability happens when the final sign-off happens. So when these governance artifacts are created, one of the things we are doing is there's a review by the team, there's attestation within the company to say, hey, you know what? I, as the chief data officer, have signed off that this system is okay to be deployed in production. And within the context of risk we know, we are willing to take on the liability of those risks. So there's this document that basically gets attested to. That's where the accountability comes in. Obviously, when auditing standards happen and you can bring in a third-party auditor or maybe your audit team separately. And in that case, you can also do third-party assessments.
Thank you. Ross, is it a question here?
Yes, I do. I have a question about your comment about move fast with intention. What concerns me generally in this era of belt tightening among the companies we all know and love in terms of technical innovation, that the teams that are getting hit the hardest are the policy teams, are the ethical assessors. So I was wondering if that is being discussed at all or anywhere, because I see that as a real red flag and moving backward, not forward, in terms of figuring out where we're going next, particularly with regulation on the horizon.
Great question. And I would say that the companies that are letting go of their ethical and policy teams, you should see that as a red flag, and those are the brands that you should not be trusting. What we are seeing within our practice is the companies that are actually, which we call AI first, ethics forward companies, they're actually doubling down on this effort. So I'm sure you're taking examples of some of the known names that we've read in media. I won't take their names here, but too bad for them. Like, that just means that that's going to be a brand that you can't trust in the future. What we are seeing is, it's not just about winning anymore with AI, it's how you win with AI. And the companies that are putting a lot of focus on how you win, they're bringing in policy focus, they're bringing in multi-stakeholders, they're really creating this enduring long brand so that as they're bringing more AI, they are going to not only compete with that AI, but they're also going to retain their customers longer. They're going to retain their employees longer. They're going to be these enduring brands that emerge based on some of the decisions you're seeing right now.
Thank you so much. I think that's our end, right? Thank you for that fantastic question. And
thank you, Renée.